progress. I do have a new undock time for you. We're now targeting 0715 for undock sequence start and 0720 separation from station. Expect on your timeline depart burn 0, 1, 2, and 3 will move 15 minutes to the right, but return burn and subsequent burns are not impacted. No impact to splashdown time. How copy?
Copy, we've got the new undock is 0715 and leaving station is 0720 and expecting the departure burn plus 15 minutes, no impact to other burns.
You've got it. All Dragon systems continue to look healthy. I've got no off-nominal conditions to report on the vehicle. On weather, the forecast for Tampa continues to predict calm sea states. We're looking at 2 possible alternate sites if required, and they are both a 48-hour wave off. How copy?
Okay, copy. Dragon's looking good. Tampa is good, and you're still considering the alternate.
Good copy. On recovery forces, we have our recovery vessel Shannon on site at Tampa. All boat systems are healthy, and they're looking forward to seeing you. How copy?
Okay, we look forward to seeing the team and Shannon once we get back on Earth, and the crew's doing well.
And that was my last question for you, is if you had any questions for the ground.
Okay, thank you. No questions from the crew.
Okay, copy. Great working with you. Sit tight for best fuel leak checks, and I'll get back to you shortly.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome here to the launch pad and our live coverage of the undocking of Crew 5 with Crew Dragon Endurance from the International Space Station. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name's Zach. I'm the founder and host here at TLP, and here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow because we believe that space is better together. And you just heard there an update from the ground to Station and Dragon on an updated timeline for today. SpaceX is going to go live here in just a moment, so let's listen into them for another update as they continue towards the undocking of Crew Dragon Endurance from the International Space Station.
Live view of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as we await its departure from the International Space Station. We await its departure from the International Space Station so it can make its way back to planet Earth. It's Friday, March 10th here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and we're expecting the Dragon spacecraft to push away from the ISS at about 11:20 p.m. Pacific time, or about 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time. On board will be our Crew 5 astronauts, including NASA's Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, along with Japan's Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos's cosmonaut Anna Kikina. The crew is currently suited, and the Dragon and Space Station hatches are sealed in preparation for the upcoming departure opportunity. Thanks for tuning in to watch our live coverage of Crew Dragon completing its 5th official long-duration mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Now, for those of you following along, you'll know that the Crew 6 spacecraft just arrived last week and will be taking over on the space station, allowing the Crew 5 crew to come home. My name is Shiva, and I'm a space operations engineer here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Leah Cheshire.
Thanks for having me, Shiva. I'm excited to get to work together tonight. It's always great to be here. And once Dragon departs station, the crew's flight home is expected to last around 19 hours. So upon separation from the International Space Station, where it has called home for almost 6 months, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers that we call departure burns, 4 to be exact. And this will increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn that will lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with the landing location.
Now, next on the trip home will be its deorbit entry and landing. That'll cover all the operations after that final departure maneuver. That includes the trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, and then deployment of its drogue and main parachutes. Finally, finishing off with splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna. On Saturday evening, March 11th, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida around 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels, currently targeting recovery vessel Shannon.
Today on board the space station, we have the Expedition 68 crew, led by Roscosmos cosmonaut and space station commander Sergei Prokopyev. Of course, just like the approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, so that means there shouldn't be any action from the crew members on board. Today, NASA astronaut Steve Bowen, who arrived last week on Crew 6, helped the crew members prepare for departure, and he can watch from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on Nicole Mann, our commander in Crew 5, and Josh Cassada, also inside Dragon. The mission control teams in Houston and here in Hawthorne will back them up. To learn a little bit more about how things are going at Johnson Space Center and hear about how the station crew has been preparing to send Crew 5 home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs, I'm going to toss it to my friend Dan Hewitt.
Hey Leah, and hey Shiva, great to see you guys, great to talk with you, and welcome everybody inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It has been an eventful night already as we're getting prepared to have Crew 5 undock from the International Space Station. We did a little bit of a sleep shift, the crew waking up a few hours earlier than normal just to get everything ready to go today. We've been watching the weather very closely. That's always a watch item. We have to have acceptable weather conditions both at our prime site and a backup site, and we were able to get those conditions locked in when we did a final weather briefing just about 2.5 hours ago to get that go for undock. So that was a really big checkpoint to get through. Once we got past that, the crew was woken up and they started stepping through everything to get ready basically to come home today. They've been moving cargo on board Dragon over the last couple of days as they get ready, and then they also started carrying in all of what's called power cargoes, so stuff that needs electricity from Dragon systems to keep it cold during that flight home. That's some of the last stuff that we put inside. They did a couple of other checks, make sure the center of gravity was right. They installed a LiO cartridge, getting Dragon's carbon dioxide scrubbing system ready. The crew got suited up. They did 4 leak checks of their suits. Once they were seated inside Dragon, we had 4 good leak checks. And then after the hatches were closed, which that happened a little over an hour ago, we were able to get into what's known as vestibule depress. So we've gone through that. The vestibule, that's that space between station and the Dragon spacecraft itself, that's been brought down to just above vacuum. There's almost no atmosphere left between those 2 hatches. And then after that's completed, we have about a 30-minute timer that goes up just to make sure we don't see any pressure differentials inside that vestibule, making sure that we're not having any leaks from Dragon or the station side. And after we get through that, we can get into the undocking. So that started a little bit behind schedule, so our undocking time moved about 15 minutes to the right, but good news for us, we actually weren't going to be able to have video of Dragon undocking if we were at a normal time. So this is going to work out great for us, and we're going to be able to see Dragon fly away. So all of that has been done so far. We're waiting for that vestibule leak check to be completed. Then we start to take Dragon's power systems to internal power. It's been drawing power from station. We also change all of its data from that hardline connection to station over to all of the wireless communications that it's going to use to talk. And then it's time for undock. And so we'll send an undocking command that's targeted to go about 15 minutes after the hour right now, and that kicks off a 5-minute sequence where the umbilicals will retract, the hooks will start to open, and 5 minutes later those thrusters fire and Dragon will separate and start the flight home. So all of that's coming up. We're just waiting to get through this final leak check. They'll do the final go-no-goes with the team here in Houston and the team out there in Hawthorne and get Dragon ready to start making its trip home. So we're going to keep following along from here. Looking forward to Crew 5 coming home and splashing down off the coast of Florida, off of Tampa tomorrow night. But for now, I'll send it back over to Leah and Shiva out at Hawthorne.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. That was a really great overview of the undocking sequence. As Dan had mentioned, separation is set for approximately 11:20 p.m. Pacific time, but the actual undock sequence command will end up will be sent around 11:15 p.m. And there's a couple of checks that Dragon goes through. There's hooks that need to be opened, umbilicals that need to be retracted. Those umbilicals provided power to and actually communications to the Dragon spacecraft while it was attached to the station. But of course, when we're leaving, we need to put those things back in the undock configuration. So all that takes about 5 minutes. Actually, I really love this view that we have inside the capsule. You can see our commander and pilot, and actually in the back corner on the wall, you can see 2 of their mission patches from the Crew 3 and the Crew 5 missions.
Yes, this is not the first flight for this spacecraft. This Dragon vehicle is named Endurance. It's a tradition for the crew members, the first crew that gets to fly on a new spacecraft to get to name that spacecraft. So Crew 3 chose the name Endurance for this one. Of course, that sticks even when you get a new crew on it. Crew 5 is who you see today in the very foreground of the image. That is Nicole Mann. She is the commander for Crew 5, and she is the first Native American woman to live on the space station. So pretty cool right here on the heels of International Women's Day.
Yeah, and in sort of the background there, but of course not a background member, is our pilot, Josh Cassada. I believe he is a UC Berkeley alum, is that right? Or am I getting that wrong?
Potentially. I'm not 100% sure.
Any case, he is the pilot on the mission. Now, the pilot and the commander both have displays in front of them. They have the ability to send commands to the Dragon spacecraft, and actually, if they needed to, they could pilot the spacecraft, although, fingers crossed that we won't need that today. And they're also wearing their suits right now. We've just gone back to a view on the outside of the capsule. But we heard Dan talking about the suit leak checks that they do earlier on the suits, and the suits are really a safety system for the crew.
Yeah, absolutely. So the suits are custom fitted for each of the crew members. They look pretty comfortable. And before any of these dynamic phases of flight, any of the burns that happen, undockings, launches, you want to make sure that the crew is in their suit, that it's secure, that there are no leaks. The suit is the way that the crew members are also able to communicate with the ground and with each other. And they also have some airflow in their suits as well to help keep them nice and cool.
Yeah, the suits are also made of fire-resistant material. We really have them on board for fire emergency, or if the cabin were to depressurize, then the suits can provide pressurized gases to the crew members and keep them safe while we bring them home. Here's a video of the suit. So we've got the 3D printed helmet that's custom and the visors. There's an umbilical connection on the right leg, and that umbilical connection actually is what provides gas flow to the suits, as well as the communication that you were talking about, Leah. And so there's an inner bladder layer to the suit, and then there's outer layers on the suit. That inner layer is what holds the pressure in the suit should we need it, and then the outer layers are fire-resistant material and also, of course, make them look super cool.
We just saw a note pop up on the bottom of the screen that talks about the boots, and those are able to secure themselves, I guess, kind of click into the footrest. Now, the footrest is part of the seat that can be removed. So when the crew is in an extended free flight period, maybe during launch, if they had, a long time from launch to docking, or like we see tonight, they'll have some extended time from undocking to splashdown tomorrow. They can actually remove those footrests, give themselves a little more room in the capsule. So it's a nice way to open up that space.
Yeah, and of course, everything in the capsule has a function and a purpose. So you talked about how the suits are custom fitted. We actually have some custom inserts on the seats as well, based on the size of each crew member, so they have a good fit in the seat. And that's really for those really dynamic phases, like during the launch and during descent. You start to pick up gravitational acceleration on the body, and we want to make sure all those forces are comfortably put away through the seats and not in an uncomfortable way that could potentially hurt the crew. So that, along with the seat rests, are actually adjustable, and there is like a groove on the bottom of the seat that they lock in their seats into. As we actually step into final prep for departure, we may hear a call from the core reminding them about their visors and reminding them about their seat positioning and restraints ahead of the undock sequence.
So right now, we have 11 people living on the International Space Station for this past, it has been a week. And so that is an even more full house than usual. We have had some crew members sleeping in Crew Dragon. It's really important that we're able to space out our crew members. You know, they have their normal crew quarters that our long duration visitors will stay in. Crew 5 was nice enough to clean those up and turn them over to their new visiting Crew 6 arrivals. And they are now reducing this crew size back down to 7, so what we would typically refer to as a full house.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny you mentioned the crew members sleeping in Dragon. Dragon does have 2 windows on the side of the spacecraft that you can see out of. So on previous missions, crew members have actually snapped photos of other Dragons or other visiting vehicles, or just great views of planet Earth. Honestly, it'd be great to have a bedroom with a window view of the planet. That sounds amazing.
I was just thinking it would be very hard for me to want to go to sleep if that was my window view.
Now, with 11 crew members on board, there's a lot of different cultural diversity. We have, just on this mission, an astronaut from Japan, a cosmonaut from Russia, of course, 2 Americans. That must make for some pretty interesting conversations and meals and just cultural diversity on the station.
Yeah, I think so. And just last week, Sultan Al Niadi arrived as one of the Crew 6 crew members, and he is from the United Arab Emirates. So I know they're very proud to have their first long-duration crew member on board. But it is the International Space Station, such a great example of peaceful cooperation with all of our crew members.
Yeah. Okay, so quick timeline check. We are about 15 minutes away from the planned command for undock sequence start. And again, we are once that command is sent, there'll be about a 5-minute period where Dragon will perform some final configurations for undocking. So in that configuration, we open up the hard capture hooks. There are 12 of those around the ring of the docking mechanism, and they hold in the pressure in that vestibule section. Of course, all of that is depressurized now.
Yeah, so you mentioned there are 12 hooks. Those are released in 2 sets of 6. When Dragon arrives, they are also initiated in those 2 sets of 6. So we'll be watching once that command is sent. It's also very interesting. Dragon will conduct very short burns to help it depart from the International Space Station instead of the springs like we might see on a Russian Soyuz.
Yeah. Now, at the moment, Dragon is in this final configuration before undocking. We're waiting for mission operators to conduct their go, no-go poll. So there's a set of flight rules that all of the folks in mission control are referencing to make sure Dragon is healthy for undocking. And then once that go, no-go poll is complete, we'll proceed with the undocking procedure, of course, assuming that we are go.
And keeping our fingers crossed. But just like during the approach to the space station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, so the crew shouldn't have any actions. It's typically faster and easier this time around because the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints like we see when they arrive to the space station.
Yeah, and once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon does use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station, like you mentioned, Leah. There's a series of maneuvers. We call them departure burns. For this mission, there'll be 4, and they increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, Dragon performs a phasing burn, and then that puts it on the right target to get back home for the splashdown location.
And just a quick pause to say we did just get a good vestibule leak check, so that means that things are marching forward for our undock today. But wrapping up its trip home tomorrow, March 11th, Dragon will go through the deorbit entry and landing process, or splashdown, I should say. And that covers all of the operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the Drogan main parachutes, of course, and finally, splashdown off the Florida coast. As you heard mentioned earlier, that will be off Tampa, the coast of Tampa. At which point, teams will recover the Crew 5 astronauts inside Crew Dragon from the water.
Now we're looking at a view of mission control. So that's mission control in Hawthorne, California. And each of those rows are primary controllers, operators who have a wealth of experience about the various different systems on Dragon, as well as experience about the crew member. We've even got flight surgeons on there, medical doctors who are familiar with the individual needs of the crew members and also their health and safety. That second row from the back has the core and the mission director, as well as the SIS-2. There's a number of specialists in there. And the front row in front of that there's a SIS-1 operator who's responsible for all the hooks and avionics and systems. The call that you mentioned earlier was actually from the SIS-2 saying, hey, we did our leak check. The leak rates look good, so we're not going to vent any additional gas off of the International Space Station. Because, of course, we got to bring all the gas up to the space station that we use.
And usually you're one of those voices that we're hearing sometimes as one of the systems engineers down there. So loving having you up here today. But we're expecting that go, no-go for undocking in the next few minutes. But everything that we're hearing right now sounds like things are moving along pretty nicely.
Yeah.
And again, we are expecting the undock command to be...
Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for exercise.
So just listening to the loops right now.
And Houston, go ahead on 2.
Hey, just a friendly reminder, for the undock today, any exercise should be complete by 7:15.
Exercise complete by 7:15. Copy, thanks.
So that was the voice of our CAPCOM, or Capsule Communicator in Mission Control Houston, speaking with the crew members on the space station. It is Saturday for them, so they are off schedule a little bit today.
Station and Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, vestibule leak check nominal.
Dragon copy.
And that was a call from the core, the crew resources and operations engineer here at the Hawthorne Mission Control, letting the crew know that we had a successful leak check, which means we're getting real close to that go, no go for the undock sequence.
One thing I find really interesting is they were reminding them that any exercise that's happening right now on the space station needs to be complete by the time that undock command is sent. We don't want any extra loads or forces being imparted during the time that Crew Dragon is preparing to separate or separating from the space station. And that can come from something as small as someone jogging on the treadmill or using the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, or ARED.
Yeah. And the crew members' time on board, actually, hang on just a sec. They're having some conversations on the loops about the go, no-go poll. So the mission director has just requested the flight control team to complete their go, no-go poll. So we'll expect that call shortly here. But we were talking a little bit about the exercise on station. The crew members' time on space station is pretty heavily scripted. And I also understand that both for health reasons and also just for their emotional well-being, they really value that exercise time.
Yeah, and they have different exercises that they can complete. Like I mentioned earlier, they do have a treadmill. Things are modified a little bit differently on the space station. You do have to buckle in so that when you run, you don't, run off the treadmill every time. But they exercise approximately 2 hours a day so that they can maintain their muscle mass and their bone density. Because if you're not using those things in space for a period of 6 months, you can come home and not be as good of shape as when you left. So
yeah.
They usually come back pretty healthy and strong thanks to all those studies and their exercise.
Yeah, and actually the transition from microgravity to gravity does cause the fluids in your body to shift a little bit. It also, your heart actually pumps blood a little bit differently because the feedback receptors for your blood pressure expect there to be gravity on your body. So the crew on Crew 5 before splashdown will actually take a few actions to load up on some fluids and wear some special garments to kind of help with that fluid shift and help with adjusting back from microgravity to a gravity environment.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of that fluid shifts to your head from your legs, from what I understand. And we had Rajachari on the Crew 6 launch broadcast last week who mentioned that even astronauts who don't typically wear glasses are prescribed glasses when they go to space because that fluid, from what they believe and understand, can put pressure on your eyeballs and change your vision while in space.
Yeah, my favorite fun fact about that is it also changes your sense of taste.
Yes.
So you hear a lot of astronauts saying that they really love hot sauce and spicy food.
Yes, I've heard that too.
So if you're ever sending a package to space, send some hot sauce.
This is a live view from inside Dragon Endurance. You've got Nicole Mann, your commander of Crew 5, on the left, and Josh Cassett, a pilot, on the right. You can see they are monitoring the crew displays in front of them. Again, a fully autonomous flight is what we anticipate, but that is where they would be able to take over and take control of the spacecraft if need be. However, things looking good for that undock command to be sent approximately 7 minutes from now.
This is a really great view of the crew displays. So there are three displays in the Dragon spacecraft. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually see the forward view. So they're looking at an imager that's looking at the docking port. And sort of in the upper right corner, they can actually see a representation of which thrusters are firing on the vehicle. In the middle, they've got a set of their procedures. So in this case, it's what we refer to as event details, but it's really the list of events that'll happen as the vehicle transitions through all these states. And then they've got a map of where they are on the world, which also gives them some indication of when burns are upcoming. And then on the right side, it looks like Josh has got a status page up of the vehicle. You can sort of see there's a bar there on the left. If we were to get any alerts or cautions on board the vehicle, he'd be able to quickly move from that page and address and triage those alerts and see if they have any impact or crew actions associated with them.
Speaking of that map of the world, currently the International Space Station is flying 270 statute miles just south of Australia. And again, tomorrow we're expecting that splashdown to come just off the coast of Tampa, Florida. And you can see their visors are also still up, so I anticipate that they'll get the call to lower those visors here shortly as we are awaiting that undock command.
Yeah, the visors are one of the components that the crew can open or close without having an impact on the leak checks that they performed earlier. We asked that they keep all of their gloves and zippers.
Endurance, SpaceX on the big loop. Final reconfigurations for undock complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for the undock sequence start at 07:15 and separation at 07:20. When ready, confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure.
Dragon copies. Crew, all visors are down. We are ready for undock and departure.
We copy.
And right on time, they got the call to lower those visors because Dragon is go to undock, both from teams here in Hawthorne as well as Mission Control in Houston, and the crew reporting that themselves. So now we get to wait for the undocking sequence to begin. And once it happens, it'll take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, where it has called home for almost 6 months.
Yeah, and the first step in that automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract. We've got 2 umbilicals on the Dragon spacecraft that connect Dragon to the space station, and they provide power from the space station's power system, those big solar arrays, as well as telemetry and a command path between the vehicles while Dragon is docked. And once the umbilicals are detached, then Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station. It'll release what are called 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. You might hear that referred to as the gangs of hooks. We need 11 of those 12 hooks to have a good seal on the vestibule, which is that pressurized volume in between the station and Dragon. Of course, that volume is unpressurized right now since we're about to depart. Now, all of that takes about 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and will begin moving itself away using a firing of its Draco thrusters.
And like I mentioned earlier, the initial departure for Dragon from the space station looks different than Soyuz, because Soyuz relies on springs to push it away from a docking port, whereas we'll see those 2 short thruster firings to undock. Those are using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule. The first breaks any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second will slowly back the spacecraft away. So we are expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin right around 11:15 p.m. Pacific time. So in the next few minutes, we should get that call, but everything checking out so far. We've got all of our crew members suited up in their seats, just monitoring the ride home.
Yeah, so those thruster firings are actually pretty helpful as well because they give us a little mini checkout of the propulsion system before we start using it for some of those bigger burns. We actually did do a propulsion system checkout ahead of the undocking sequence. So we've talked a little bit about the leak checks that happened, and we've talked about the vestibule depressurization. But actually, over the last few days, there have been a number of checkouts performed to make sure that the comm systems, the propulsion systems, the suits, everything in the vehicle is healthy in the correct configuration for undock. So this is kind of that one extra free check we get with the Draco firings, and it means one less mechanism on the vehicle.
Got about 2 minutes until that undocking command is sent and that sequence begins, those hooks releasing. Now, as we mentioned, this is coming about 15 minutes behind when we initially thought we would undock. We've got a series of checks that we go through that both teams on the ground and the crew, obviously on the International Space Station, both in Dragon and on the station side, need to make sure everything's checked out before departure. But we have a window for these undockings that will still allow the crew members to splash down at the same time tomorrow. So it's a little bit different. Actually, it's quite a lot different from those instantaneous launch windows that we have. Whereas if you do not launch on that exact second, your trajectory is not lined up to meet with the International Space Station. So you get a little more grace when it comes to an undocking.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the orbital mechanics. When you're higher up in orbit, you actually need less thrust to make a bigger change in your orbit. There are some Newtonian equations you could go work on to figure out why. I'm not going to try to explain it all right now because I probably wouldn't do a very good job of it. But it is a function of the orbital mechanics. And because of that, while we do try to leave on time, it's more important that we review the data and understand that the vehicle is in a healthy state. And Dragon can actually make up a little bit of a delay, or even if we were to depart a little bit early on the undock sequence. There's a set of onboard flight computers.
Endurance and station SpaceX on the big loop undock sequence commanded.
Dragon copy.
So call from the core there that the undock sequence has started. We also heard a call on the loops that the umbilicals have begun to retract. So with Dragon getting ready for the undock sequence, I think it'd probably be a good time to check in with Dan at Mission Control at Johnson. Dan?
Hey, thanks, Shiva. Yeah, we can see the umbilicals retracting. They're just about completed.
Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
Dragon copy.
All right, we heard the confirmation the umbilicals have demated. Again, those provided hardline power and data connections. Those have now detached. The first set of 6 hooks are now driving. Reminder, we've got 2 different sets of hooks, each in sets of 6, 12 total. After the first set has released, we are committed to an undocking. So that first set, 6, is driving now, and we expect all of this to take another 3 minutes or so before we get that physical separation when those thrusters on Dragon will fire and begin backing Crew Dragon Endurance away from the space station. So again, umbilicals have retracted. That undocking sequence being commanded right on time at the new time. At about 15 minutes after the hour, the first set of hooks are now driving to release. Following that, the next 6 will immediately start to disengage. And then once those have separated, the thrusters will fire. We'll get the 2 quick undocking burns. That first one only being about 1.5 seconds, so just a real quick pulse of those service section Dracos to start backing Dragon away, and then a slightly longer one of about 5 seconds to increase that rate. But we are on our way right now, still a couple of minutes until we get that physical separation, still waiting for that first set of hooks to disengage. But again, a lot already done to get here. The station itself still in the attitude control over on the US segment. We've done something called inhibiting desats, so essentially no thrusters on the station are able to fire right now. So attitude fully in control of the...
First set of hooks open and nominal. Second set of hooks traveling.
All right, first set open. Second set opening. We are now committed to an undock. So this next set of 6 are going to open. We should have them open within the next 2 minutes, and then we'll get physical separation, and we'll call you an undocking time. And we're seeing nominal performance so far on this second set of hooks. Standing by should be within about a minute or so until this second set opens. That'll be all 12 opened, and there will be no physical mechanism still in place holding Dragon to the international docking adapter. We're looking at it attached to the forward port on the station to that docking adapter. As soon as this next set opens within the next minute, Dragon's going to fire a real quick burst, again about 1.5 seconds to start backing away, and that'll be our physical separation, and that'll be our time of undocking. After that initial undocking burn, we'll do another one lasting about 5 seconds, keep backing away, and then we'll do a couple of departure burns to eventually bring Dragon out over top of the station, around, and then underneath. But for now, we are all eyes on the last set of hooks holding Dragon in place, where it's been for more than 150 days attached to this forward port on the space station. Standing by for physical separation.
All hooks open.
All hooks open. Depart burn 1 has fired. Dragon Endurance undocked 262 statute miles over the Coral
Dragon
Sea.
SpaceX on the big loop, separation confirmed.
Second copies, we see it.
So a successful separation. Again, Dragon undocking at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, with Dragon and station flying 262 statute miles over the Coral Sea off the northeastern coast of Australia. So with that, Dragon now stepping into
Depart
these
burn
depart
0
burns.
nominal.
Second copy.
All right, so undock burns completed. That depart burn 0 completed. Next one coming up in just a couple of minutes, but with Dragon now flying free, I'm going to toss it back over to Shiva and Leah at MCCX in Hawthorne to take us through the rest of the flight.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. So we had some great shots there of the first depart burn. We're coming up on depart burn. So that was the depart burn 0. Now we're coming up on depart burn number 1. Now this will be a short firing of the Dragon's Draco thrusters. The burn just lasting about 16 seconds. You can see that Dragon has begun to fly away from the space station, and these initial depart burns essentially increase the range rate from the station so we can get away from the International Space Station and get out of these various different spheres of control around the vehicle that keep both of the vehicles safe.
So we heard a call for successful depart burn 0. That 16-second burn, that increases the speed at which Dragon is flying away from the station. It's going to start to send it up and over the space station. It'll eventually come down and then behind the space station. This depart burn 0 puts crew Dragon Endurance and Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna on their journey home. So there's a good look at where depart burn 0 takes us. We'll also be standing by for depart burn 1. That's another short burn, about 21 seconds. That's going to keep us on that trajectory to go over and then eventually down and behind the International Space Station. Depart Burn 1 is also going to be what's going to send us out of the Keep Out sphere. That is an invisible sphere around the International Space Station. It's a boundary, 200 meters in radius, and it helps us determine, or helps us govern visiting spacecraft arriving or departing the space station. So before moving into that Keep Out sphere, you have to your spacecraft must be configured so that it would not cross that boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if for some reason it lost all maneuvering. So we monitor that before and after departure. Crew Dragon continuing to make its way further from the space station.
We're continuing to get some really cool views from the International Space Station cameras. So this one's got Dragon, and it looks like one of the robotic arms in the foreground, Dragon in the background. And of course, the opportunity today was a little bit delayed from the initial timing, but as a result, it turned out that we had better communications coverage so we could actually get some of these views from the space station. Now, Leah, I really like your explanation of the Keep Out sphere. I kind of analogize it to if you've ever flown into a major airport, there's an air traffic control team who's governing who can come into the airport, what timing they should go do that. And the Keep Out sphere is one of those imaginary constructs that allows the flight control teams of the visiting vehicles, as well as the flight control team in Johnson, to make sure that everyone is safe and no one is inadvertently entering to a place that is habited by people.
Yeah, and we have a couple of those boundaries. The Keep Out sphere is the one closer to the space station, and the other is the approach ellipsoid. That one is a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer, again, an ellipsoid. It's more, it's not as much of a sphere. And it is also an imaginary shape, but it also helps us monitor those arrivals and departures of any and all visiting spacecraft.
Station on the big loop.
Right station.
Duke and Crew 5, magnificent sunset departure. You guys look great. Great job up here. We're going to miss you. Godspeed.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank, and the rest of the crew. We'll be following along.
Some kind words exchanged between the crew members. They were talking about the big loop, so that is the way that we refer to the combined communications between Mission Control in Johnson, the International Space Station, visiting vehicle, so Dragon, and then, of course, controllers here in Hawthorne.
Yeah, and we were talking about the approach ellipsoid. So what we're in right now, where we're talking on that big loop, this is joint operations. Both mission control teams working together with Crew Dragon, with the space station, and we are actually coming right up on Depart Burn 1. So that's what's going to take us up and over the station. But yes, it must be a little. Oh, and confirmation that Depart Burn 1 has started. Again, this is about a 21-second burn using those service section Draco thrusters.
And every once in a while, thank you to the ground station or the ground operators on the Johnson side. They give us some higher.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, Depart Burn 1 nominal, and we see Dragon on a nominal trajectory away from station. At this time, you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. And finally, I have a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Dragon copies, and to the teams at NASA and SpaceX, thank you for an incredible expedition. It has been your tireless efforts and attention to detail that have helped make this mission successful. I can't tell you how great it feels to be part of such an incredible team. And to the crew on board the International Space Station, you've got it. Make us proud. We'll be following along your mission. And to our friends and family, thank you for following along and being a part of our mission. It has been a privilege to add to the legacy. Semper Fidelis.
It is absolutely overwhelming to back away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year.
Station copies,
All
Duke.
of us on
Safe flight.
are incredibly proud.
So a few
It's
things.
absolutely overwhelming to be backing away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year. All of us on Crew 5 are incredibly proud of the work we've accomplished while we were there. And to everyone who had a role in Expedition 68, whether direct or indirect, you should feel the exact same way. We thank you, and we're excited to get back to that beautiful planet of ours and those wonderful people who live on it. Thank you.
That was a beautiful view of the space station as we all the mission control centers all over the world. Thank you very much for your support. It's a privilege and a pleasure to work with all of you at the mission control centers. And it's CA crew, Sergey, Dmitry, Frank, Steve, Woody, Saturdau, and Andre. Bon voyage, and we'll be following along. Thank you. Arigatou gozaimashita. Saturdau basho.
Very much for everyone, for everybody, for April 9th. I really happy to have that film and visible and forgettable in my life. It's really cool. Thank you very much for everybody.
Some words from all 4 Crew 5 members giving a final farewell to the International Space Station as...
And Dragon Houston on the Big Loop, Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. We wish you safe travels and looking forward to seeing you back on Earth.
Second copy, Houston.
So we just heard from the Capcom, the capsule communicator in Houston, that Crew Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. That was the imaginary boundary we were talking about just moments ago. 200 meters in radius around the station. One of those safety zones while we are in joint operations that help us monitor any spacecraft arriving or departing. So before moving into the Keep Out sphere, again, that the rule essentially is the spacecraft, if it for some reason lost maneuvering capability, it would not cross into that border for at least 4 orbits. But of course, departing, we don't have that same requirement. They are now well out of the Keep Out sphere and heading toward the approach ellipsoid.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we have all of those flight rules and the mission control teams there. Each operator is evaluating their systems to ensure that Dragon is safe to enter both the approach
Dragon
ellipsoid.
SpaceX on Dragon to ground for suit storage.
Go ahead, Jake.
Hey Josh, I've just got a reminder here 6 months later to store suits with helmet visors closed. How copy?
We got it. Thanks a lot for the reminder.
Some friendly words from your friendly neighborhood core. Of course, the crew have been on the space station for about 6 months. So the little quirks of how do you pack things in the vehicle safely to make sure, in this case, that the visors don't get scratched or damaged, just reminded them to keep them closed in the suit bag. They do actually get some training on the space station to kind of remind them about some quirks about the vehicle, actions that they need to take during the undock sequence and the departure sequence. So Josh acknowledging that.
Everybody needs a refresher every now and then. And again, we are outside of the Keep Out sphere. We are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit. That's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible boundary again. And once we are out of the approach ellipsoid, that ends joint operations. So the International Space Station mission control team will go back into their nominal configuration where they are just monitoring the space station, and the team here in Hawthorne will continue monitoring the return flight of Dragon Endurance.
Yeah, and one of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what's called a 24-hour free drift safe trajectory. So what that means is if the vehicle had no ability to control its attitude, to control its orbital parameters, it would not be on a trajectory that could potentially interact with the space station for at least 24 hours. That gives time for ground operators on the ISS side to consider an adjustment to the ISS's trajectory, but ideally for the visiting vehicle team to work any issues.
Check from the mic, cabin mic.
Dragon, SpaceX, we had you 5x5 on the cabin mic. Good comm check.
So call there from Koichi.
We have you loud and clear also. Thank you.
Now at this phase, because we're outside of Depart Burn 1 and on our way out of the approach ellipsoid, we've actually given the go to the crew to doff their suits. So that means taking off their suits. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there's an umbilical that connects the suits to the comm system, but once they're out of that, they actually have to use a cabin mic that's in the cabin, and we always want to maintain communication with the crew in case we need to provide them any urgent instructions or if they need to give us any information. So it's just a check there that all the systems are working as they proceed into a more comfortable phase of the phasing mission.
Now we are continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit, but if you saw as Dragon was undocking from the International Space Station, the colors shifted on the spacecraft itself, and that's because the International Space Station and Dragon entered in orbital nighttime. So they see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, which seems pretty inspiring, to be honest. And they even mentioned the beautiful sunset that they got as they were traveling away from the space station. Dragon is now about 600 meters away from the International Space Station with Depart Burns 0 and 1 complete as planned and heading toward the approach ellipsoid exit. Now again, it's about a 19-hour ride home for the crew inside Dragon. Hopefully they get a nap in there somewhere, but they won't really be on duty during that time because the spacecraft is an autonomous one, so they don't need to take over and pilot it whatsoever. They are definitely trained to do so, as we've discussed, but if things are moving smoothly, which we anticipate, they should be able to rest and enjoy 19 more hours in space before they are back home sweet home.
It might be a little bit of a nice change of pace to have some off-duty time. I think I heard Dan mention earlier that the crew did have to sleep shift a little bit for this particular undock opportunity. We even caught a few views of them sort of resting up while they were in the vehicle waiting for the undock sequence. So during this off-duty period, they'll be free to use the amenities on board Dragon, have a meal, to just sleep if they want to. And then of course, as we get closer to the actual entry deorbit and landing sequence, then we will make sure that they have redonned their suits, have done their preparation for fluid loading, have confirmed that the cargo is all in a safe configuration for entry, and then they'll get suited up again in their seats for the deorbit burn and entry sequence.
Yeah, things are pretty quiet and from now until then. The next, like you said, big milestone, which they'll need to put their suits on for, will be that deorbit burn. That afterwards, we'll see the nose cone close. Obviously, that was open when we departed station. That's how the crew members ingress and egress the station. They have not used that side hatch in 6 months, so they'll finally get to open that up once again tomorrow once they're pulled on to Shannon, the ship that is waiting off the coast of Tampa for the splashdown tomorrow night. Yeah, and we had some views of it earlier when we were looking at the camera behind the crew. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye where the center display was, sort of straight past that is the forward hatch, and that's the hatch that they've been using to enter the International Space Station. That's one of the hatches that we closed today. The side hatch was a little bit lower down. The crew don't really interact with that. They can, of course, open it in an emergency on the ground, but the recovery teams will actually do most of the work there so the crew can stay nice and comfortable in their seats. And that also helps with some of the microgravity to gravity adjustment that we had been talking about. So I want to read off a few of these stats for our crew members. 3 of these crew members on Crew 5 are first-time flyers: Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina. And then Koichi Wakata, he actually just completed 500 days in space just a few days ago. He will, by the time of splashdown tomorrow, have 505 days in space across 5 different missions. And for the other crew members, they will have logged 157 days in space by the time they splash down tomorrow. This crew saw 6 visiting vehicles arrive and depart. One of those was a Cargo Dragon SpaceX 26. That brought up some of the solar arrays that some of these crew members installed during some spacewalks earlier this year. There were 2 Russian Progress resupply ships, of course, Crew 6 arrival last week on the SpaceX Dragon, Soyuz MS-23, and the Northrop Grumman Cygnus vehicle NG-18. So some of those bringing crew, some of them bringing cargo, all welcome sights to our crew members on the space station. They also saw 5 of those depart, including 3 Progress resupply ships, the Crew 4 crew, who they said farewell to about a week after they arrived in the fall, and SpaceX 26, as we mentioned.
Yeah, and the crew actually do have some role to play on those cargo missions. They, of course, pack and unpack the cargo that's in the Cargo Dragon vehicle. So Cargo Dragon being very similar to the Crew Dragon vehicle, but it doesn't have all the same life support systems. It doesn't have the displays, the seats, because the primary thing we're taking up is science and cargo for the International Space Station. The crew actually play a more hands-on role during the approach process, too. They've got procedures where they monitor the approach. Sort of if the ISS is pretty high up, and so it takes some time for communications and commands that we send from the ground to reach the vehicle. But the crew can actually send direct commands to the vehicle during the approach sequence if they needed to. So those crew were busy during that approach opportunity and the undocking as well.
Oh, and of course, the unloading and the reloading and all of the science experiments that they brought with them. So we're coming up on about 1,000 meters away from the International Space Station. It was just a few minutes ago that we saw Dragon undock right on time, around 11:20 p.m. Pacific time. We are still waiting for it to exit the approach ellipsoid. Those 2 depart burns, 0 and 1, they are on the order of 16 and 21 seconds. So they really get the spacecraft moving, though, and we anticipate that call to the crew to come just about any moment now that we are outside the approach ellipsoid.
I actually just heard some calls on the loops here that we're out of the approach ellipsoid, so we'll probably hear a similar call
Dragon
from
and Station
the core.
SpaceX
there it is.
On the big loop. The vehicle has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. To the Dragon crew, configure comm for Dragon to ground in preparation for big loop deactivation.
Dragon copies.
So the core, Jake, who we can see in the little window there.
Copy is safe travels, Endurance.
Indicating to the crew that we've exited the approach ellipsoid. Again, that's that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer ellipse. Sort of the long end is along the direction that the International Space Station is traveling around the Earth. We call that the forward direction. Core indicating that we're outside of the approach ellipsoid. Because we're outside of the approach ellipsoid and outside of join ops, we're actually going to be deactivating that big loop. So this is probably the last time that the crew are going to be talking to the International Space Station crew on this particular mission. I'm sure they'll talk to them when they get back home to planet Earth in about 19 hours from now.
Yeah, absolutely. So since it has exited the approach ellipsoid, like you mentioned, those joint operations are over. Crew Dragon is going to move into it's the rest period for the crew, essentially, like we talked about. They have doffed their suits. They're able to store those suits. They will, like you said, get the chance to sleep. And we are still targeting splashdown tomorrow at 8:02 p.m. Central, 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And that, I think, about wraps us up.
Yeah, they do have a couple more departure burns, and they'll have some return burns that adjust their phasing. But now that the NASA astronauts Nicole Mann, Josh Kashda, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina have departed the space station, it'll take them about 19 hours to make their way back to planet Earth. They're in the middle of doffing their spacesuits. We actually have them dry the spacesuits, clean it out a little bit in case they got a little bit sweaty or anything inside while they were wearing them. The splashdown opportunity is targeted off the west coast of Florida near Tampa around 6:02 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, or 9:02 p.m. Eastern time.
And there we have it, Crew Dragon Endurance undocking confirmed 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, 7:20 a.m. UTC, and over the last 23 minutes they have backed away from the International Space Station and exited that approach ellipsoid and are furthering their distance from the International Space Station. But that is going to do it for us here today. If it was your first time here, though, welcome. Here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and we hope you will join us for our Crew 5 Return to Earth coverage picking up tomorrow. But you don't have to go anywhere. That live chat's going to keep running as we are going to push you all over to our Crew Dragon tracker, where you can track the current location of Crew 5 as they begin their journey home. And then we will hope you'll join us tomorrow night for our commentary coverage of re-entry and splashdown of Crew 5. But that's going to do it from here in TLP HQ. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.